What if I told you that Ferrari is repeating the same mistakes that cost him entire championships in the hybrid era, just when they seemed ready to return to the top? Stay, because what happened in Imola could define its entire season, or your ruin. The worrying thing was not only the result but the way: lack of rhythm in the race, problems in the tuning of the car. The SF25, far from being a firm evolution, was capricious, unstable and difficult to understand. What should be a winning car behaved as a half-end project. The emotional blow was immediate. Hamilton, in his debut with Ferrari, lived a frustrating weekend. Mediocre exit, changing conditions that left him trapped in traffic, and a strategy that moved him away from any prominence. The camera captured it several times, reviewing data in the box with serious gesture. Although he tried to keep calm, in his statements he acknowledged that he did not expect to have to work so much to adapt. The car did not respond as promised in the simulators. What was supposed would be a new beginning full of energy and hope quickly became a reminder that Ferrari is not any team. Here, the pressure does not forgive and the margin of error is minimal. Meanwhile, Leclerc began to do what he knows best: take the car beyond its limit. But that also has a price. In Shanghai, he ended up playing with Hamilton in the first curve. An incident that, although lower, symbolizes something deeper. Two pilots with talent, ambition and experience, but that are clearly not in the same tune either with the car or among them. Ferrari is caught between a past of broken promises and a present where expectations are well above real performance. And so, after only 3 races, Ferrari arrives at Imola, his house, not as a favorite, but as a team that urgently needs answers. The pressure not only comes from outside. Within the garage, the tensions begin to notice. The internal comparisons between Leclerc and Hamilton are already inevitable. And the question that begins to repeat is not whether Ferrari can win, but if he really knows what he is doing. Because the problem, perhaps, is not the car or the pilots. Perhaps the problem is structural, deeper, and has been solved for years. Talking about SF25 is to face an unsolved mystery. In theory, this car should be the direct evolution of the SF24, a car that ended 2024 as the second most competitive of the grille. However, version 2025 has not complied with that inheritance. What in Maranello presented as an aerodynamic refinement, with improvements in the efficiency of the diffuser and a more stable balance between axes, has turned out to be an unpredictable, capricious and highly sensitive machine to external conditions. The lack of constancy between sessions is the first serious symptom. A car that one day behaves well in free practices and the next disappears in classification is far from being a contender to the title. One of the most notorious problems is the thermal management of the tires. The SF25 takes too long to put them in the optimal operating window. In classification, this means that neither Leclerc nor Hamilton can squeeze the potential of the car in a single round, as their rivals do. In circuits such as Melbourne and Miami, this forced them to perform additional laps that not only degrade the tire more but also do not guarantee an improvement in the final time. This weakness is critical in a category where the margins are measured in thousands and where the time lost in the first attempt can mean the immediate elimination in Q1 or Q2. The second great Achilles heel of the SF25 is on its rear train. Unlike McLaren or Mercedes, who have achieved a more coherent load distribution, Ferrari continues to suffer a lack of stability in the back of the car. This not only affects traction at the exit of curve, but also forces pilots to modify their driving style. Hamilton, for example, has had to adopt a more conservative braking technique, releasing the accelerator before and trying to compensate for instability with a smoother curve input. But even with that effort, the car does not respond predictably. And that, for a pilot of his caliber, is unacceptable. The situation is aggravated with another delicate aspect: the march height. The SF25 is too sensitive to changes in this parameter. Even minimal adjustments can cause a significant alteration in aerodynamic efficiency. In China, Hamilton was warned by excessive wear on the plate of the flat background, a symptom that the car was too low, generating friction with the asphalt. These types of problems not only compromise performance but can jeopardize the legality of the car. In such a tight championship, any sanction for technical issues can mean a loud fall in the table. To all this is added a general lack of trust among the pilots. While Leclerc seems to have accepted the limitations of the car and works on them, Hamilton is still in an adaptation phase. Trust is a vital intangible in Formula One. And when the pilot doubts the response of the car in each curve, in each braking, that instinct necessary to squeeze the decisive tenths is lost. The SF25 does not allow errors, but also gives margin to force. It is a toxic balance that prevents its drivers from running freely and, even more serious, aggressively. And perhaps the most worrying thing about everything is that from the team direction it continues to insist that the car has without exploiting potential. A message that begins to feel hollow, repeated, as a public relations strategy rather than a rigorous technical analysis. When engineers' speech collides with reality on the track and the statements of the pilots themselves, the problem is no longer only technical, it is structural. Ferrari not only needs to fix a car. You need to understand what type of car you are trying to build. Imola is not just another grand prize on the calendar. For Ferrari, it is a symbol. It is running at home, in front of their own workers, in the asphalt that represents decades of history, glory, but also of recent frustrations. Therefore, the weekend in Emilia-Romagna does not appear only as one more race, but as an urgent opportunity to rewrite the course of a season that already threatens to ship. The expectations were huge, but what Ferrari has announced as an update package has come accompanied by an unexpectedly conservative tone. Frédéric Vasseur has affirmed that it is not a great redesign, but about specific improvements, which immediately generates doubts. Because when a car drags as many structural weaknesses as the SF25, the word small does not sound like technical ambition, but tactical containment. And here is the real dilemma. Is it a measured strategy seeking not to destabilize what is already built, or is it simply an implicit recognition that Ferrari still is not clear about the root of its problems? The improvements have focused mainly on the car floor, the ends of the rear wing and certain elements of the diffuser, as it has been observed during technical inspections. The intention is clear: to generate greater rear aerodynamic load without compromising the balance of the front axle. However, any engineer with experience in Formula One knows that aerodynamic changes rarely function as isolated solutions. Modifying a load point can affect stability in another, and if there is no full understanding of the aerodynamic flow of the car, there is a risk of introducing more variables into an already unstable platform. Another important element of this package is the adjustment in the cooling system, especially in the side ducts. In theory, this should help maintain more stable tire temperatures, mitigating one of the great problems of SF25, its slow ability to put gums at optimal temperature for classification. But a modification of this type also implies a redesign of the internal air flow channel, which could compromise other aspects of the car if it is not perfectly integrated. And this is where a critical question appears. Were these updates developed as part of a consistent evolution plan since the beginning of the project, or are reactive measures taken to see how the car collapsed in the first races? Because if it is the second, then Ferrari is not improving his car. He is trying to cover his mistakes without understanding them at all. In technical language, that is called panic development, and rarely works in the long term. The true thermometer will not be the times by return, not even the final result of the race. It will be the consistency between sessions, the ease with which the pilots can take the car to the limit without errors, and above all, if the improvements allow a positive correlation between simulator, wind and track tunnel. Ferrari has historically failed in this aspect, and if it happens again in Imola, the damage can be irreversible for its 2025 campaign. Imola is the turning point. If the package works, you can give the team a real basis to build the rest of the season. But if it does not, if the SF25 continues to show the same symptoms, then it will not be an insufficient update, but an erroneous diagnosis. And that, in Formula One, is worse than having done anything. Formula One is not just an engineering sport, it is also a scenario of human tensions. And in Ferrari, that emotional dimension has always been particularly intense. What happens inside the car is only half the story. The other half is lived in the gestures, the statements, the fleeting looks between pilots and engineers, and in the awkward silences after a disappointing session. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton in 2025 promised to be a rebirth, a new beginning for all. But behind that promise, there is an increasingly complex dynamic that tests not only the machinery but to people. Hamilton is not just any pilot. He is a multiple champion, a historical figure that has built his legend based on absolute trust, performance under pressure and leadership within the team. In Ferrari, however, he has had to face an organizational culture very different from what he met in Mercedes. An environment where decisions do not always follow a logical line, where internal policy and external expectations weigh as much as telemetry data. And that, for someone like Lewis, represents a clash of cultures that has become evident since the first Grand Prix. The British's frustration has been palpable. In his debut in Australia, he was caught in a car that did not respond and a strategy that left him without real options. On the track, he was striving to find rhythm, but out of the car, the cameras captured a reflective, distant pilot. Leclerc, meanwhile, is still the spoiled child of Maranello. Know every team of the team, each procedure, and has the emotional support of the tifosi. His style is aggressive, his indisputable motivation. But it also drags the psychological wear of years loading with a lower car. That mixture of veterania in the house and personal wear creates an obvious contrast with the most methodical and strategic figure of Hamilton. That silent tension materialized in China, when both pilots played in the first curve. It was not a serious accident, but symbolic. A rubbing among colleagues that, in another team, would have been resolved with a diplomatic comment, but that in Ferrari reflects a latent tension. They are two pilots with different objectives. Leclerc wants to demonstrate that it is still the key piece of the project. Hamilton seeks to validate his decision to leave Mercedes with immediate results. And at that intention crossing, each track session also becomes a battle for internal leadership. But they are not just them. The engineers, the strategists, even the mechanics work under a pressure that is multiplied in Ferrari. Each decision made is examined with magnifying glass. Each error becomes the subject of national debate in Italy. And when the car does not yield, when the results do not arrive, the atmosphere is thin. What began as a campaign full of illusion begins to die anxiety. In the paddock, the initial smiles have been replaced by serious faces, tense gestures and eternal meetings that do not always conclude clearly. The most alarming thing is that this emotional wear also affects technical evolution. When confidence between pilots and engineers cracks, feedback sessions become less productive. When the pilots doubt the criteria of the wall, and the wall doubt of the complaints of the pilots, the coherence that a team needs to develop is lost. And that is exactly what seems to be happening in Ferrari. A divided team does not win championships, and if they fail to align their priorities, the technical problems of the SF25 will be the least compared to the internal cohesion crisis that could end up sinking them. Ferrari is not facing a simple career. It is facing a moment of definition. Imola will not only be remembered for what happens on the track, but for what it reveals of the true capabilities and limits of the team. The first races of the year have made it clear that the SF25 is far from being the dominant car that was expected, and that it is not even among the most consistent. Hope is no longer in numbers or simulations. It is in Ferrari's ability to react. And do it now, not later, because the calendar does not expect and the competition either. The redemption will not come by inertia. It demands brave decisions. Ferrari has to solve its internal fracture between technical discourse and perception of pilots, between the idea of the car they designed and the machine they really have. They need to rebuild communication not only in the operational level, but in the deep interpretation of the project. If they fail to align their narrative with the facts, the risk will not only be sports, it will be institutional. The credibility of a team like Ferrari, with its history, with its symbolic weight in Formula One, cannot afford to fall into the inertia of self-deception. And if they fail, there will be no excuses. This year's conditions were ideal. An experience of experienced pilots, a previous season of reconstruction with results, a more stable technical team than in previous cycles, and an aerodynamic base that should be improved, not reinvented. But if all those pieces do not end up fitting, then you have to look beyond the car. It would be necessary to ask if Ferrari's very structure is sabotaging, unconsciously, his own progress. Because in modern Formula One, talent is no longer enough. Cohesion, vision, real leadership is needed. It is necessary to know how to build not only a car, but an environment where that car can evolve clearly in purpose. The next race in Imola will be the first verdict. If the improvements work, if the SF25 is more manageable, if the pilots can compete without fighting the car, then the team can begin to rebuild their narrative with facts. But if they do not, if the errors themselves reappear, then we will not be talking about a team in technical crisis. We will be seeing Ferrari repeating the same disappointment cycle that has marked much of its modern era. The season is long, yes, but the championships do not win alone in the second half of the calendar. They are built from now on, from these moments where the pressure is stronger than the stopwatch. Ferrari has everything to change his destiny. The question is if he will know how to do it on time.